Good morning.
Good morning.
John pointed out that this gong is made out of an old oxygen canister, we think. So he's been, that might come up later. So to signal the beginning of our sacred time together, we light the chalice, and I think it's only fitting that I ask our guest today, John Vaillant, who you're going to be hearing much, much more from, to do the honors. We don't want a flare stack happen. Very good. We kindle this flame as a symbol of our gathering.
May the light of understanding illuminate our darkness. May the warmth of sharing bring us peace.
Thank you, John. Welcome to the North Shore Unitarian Church, where it's our mission to empower people to live with depth, meaning, and purpose. I'm Bruce Grierson, and I'll be your dog's body setup man today. And in this community, we welcome people from all walks of life. No matter how you experience the sacred, no matter who you are or who you love, we hope you feel welcome here. And let's acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We're grateful to be here, and we welcome the chance to continue to learn from them about our relationship with these lands. Now, you are in for a treat today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. John Vaillant is with us, a fine writer and an even better human being. John has a new book out that, unfortunately, could not be more relevant and timely. It's about the climate emergency and the part that we've all played in it, and the caution flags that nature keeps raising that we keep blowing right through again and again. But before we get to that, there's a ritual we do here. We used to call it joys and sorrows, I think, but now it's cares and concerns. And we have two tables, and I'm hoping that Lila and Maddie will be in front of one of each of them. You're invited to come up and light a candle over here where Lila is standing. This is the joy, or over here. This is the joy part. you can drop it. And this is the joy part. Think of something you've been grateful to bear witness to as you silently light your flame. Or you may wish to drop a stone in the water over here where Maddie is, knowing that your burden is being spread across this community. So today we're going to be talking a lot about fire, which is fitting because you use light a little fire before we do pretty much anything around here. We do everything by firelight around here. Now, you're going to hear John talk about a really devastating fire, and I think you're going to come to appreciate at a level maybe that you never have before just how destructive this force of nature is and how tragic when we let it rip and we get in the way of it. But fire has another side too. It has a constructive side. Fire brings people together. There's a story that Philip Hewitt used to tell. This is a long time sort of veteran, highly respected UU minister who used to come visit us in early January every year, and he told a story about, I think, an exercise he used to do around the campfire with some kids. And it was a marshmallow roast, and everybody built this great big fire, and everyone got these long marshmallow sticks, like 5 feet long. And so you roasted your marshmallow until you got it just perfect, and sort of golden brown, and it was like bon appetit, except the rule was you couldn't take your hand, you couldn't let go of your stick, and Pat knows this, and you couldn't touch the thing with the other hand. So everyone's now going, so how do we eat it? And your arm isn't long enough to get it. So everybody's sort of struggling and frustrated until finally it clicks for somebody, and they go and they feed somebody else, and then everybody's feeding each other, and it's like that is the kind of solution that comes to people when they're gathered around fire. And that's the kind of collective solution making that's going to be required when we tackle the big fire, a world on fire, and you're going to hear John talk about that. Now, I will tell you a secret, sort of, that today's service almost didn't happen. John agreed to do this, I would say partly as a favor to me, many, many months ago. And then like a couple of weeks ago, his publicity department learned about the plan when John called to order copies of the book for this event. And the guy at Penguin Random House, or Random Penguin House, as some of us like to call it, he says, so the guy has, so he's totally wrong-footed, because this thing has been 7 years in the making. This book, everyone's been waiting on John. He's in his lair. When's the book going to be done? And finally, it's happening, and the Penguin folks are thrilled. It's like coaxing Rihanna out to play the Super Bowl after 7 years of silence. And so they're thinking, the Super Bowl, not North Shore Unitarian Church, right? And it's like the big launch is scheduled for next week at the Vancouver Public Library. Everything's been building to that. And so the Penguin guy learns about this, and he says, absolutely not. So I get a text from John, please call me. And he says on the phone, so Steve, the publicity guy, says I can't come. And my heart sinks, oh. So John says, so you know what that means? He said, I'm coming anyway, but I'm not telling anyone. And I'm thinking, a bandit reading, what could be better than that? And in the end, John decides to take the high road because he's that kind of guy. And he calls up the Penguin guy again, and he says, look, let's put this on the table. This event is not going to steal anybody's thunder. It's a church service. He said, I'm being folded in between the hymns and the animal sacrifice or whatever they do up there. He does, And so the Penguin guy goes, well, all right. And as long as you keep it on the totally down, on the down low. And John says, absolutely. And I'm thinking, this is the first time in the history of sales that a guy sells his product by promising not to talk about it. And I had planned to call the North Shore News and tell them to send a reporter. John Vaillant is breaking his 7-year radio silence in North Vancouver at our own little humble cabin in the woods. But I didn't do that because we promised. And so this thing was just going to quietly happen. And here we are. Now, John has brought copies of the book, still warm from the presses. It's not officially out. And they'll be on sale and he'll be signing copies for people in the basement after this. And he's generously donating all proceeds to our Justice for Danny Cooper initiatives. All right, and that's actually where the collection plate is going today as well for the very last time. So could I ask the ushers to please come forward?
Hi, everybody. This next hymn that the next song that we're going to sing, I think deserves some explanation because it's seductive to listen to, but it's not what it seems. This is a hymn of Axiom by Vienna Tang. The music intentionally lures you into a sense of being listened to, being heard, being loved. And yet, it's loved by the great money machine. The words are coming from the amazing equations that encourage us to spend our money. Somebody hears you. You know that. You know that. Somebody hears you. You know that inside. Someone is learning the colors of all your moods to show that you are understood. Here, you are known. Leave your life open. You don't have to. You don't have to leave your life open. You don't have to hide. Someone is gathering every crumb that you mindless decisions and moments you long forgot. Keep them born. Now we possess you. You'll own that. You will own that. Now we possess you. You will own that in time. Now we will build you an endlessly upward reach in your pockets, embrace for all your worth. Is that wrong? Isn't this what you want? Amen. Amen. So, I very rarely will do a piece that is as sardonic as this. I don't know if that's the right words, but somehow it feels like if it even manages to touch us enough to be conscious of how greed and the desire to own stuff is our own undoing, then maybe it's worth it. So, here we go.
Hard to know how to feel after that. Here we are.
Yeah, wow. That's
It's amazing.
that's intense.
Here we are
Here we are.
between two ferns.
Yes, between two ferns. What's a fern among friends?
So, John, welcome. Thank you again for joining us. And so I hope today, in this exchange here, we can talk. We're going to talk about the book, but I also kind of want to know where your head is these days, from multiple perspectives, as a writer, as a father, as a man, I would say, of deep convictions, and I consider you a spiritual person, but you and I could argue about the definition of that. As a transplanted American, that might come into this conversation too. And I'm going to ask you to read a couple of passages from this hot off the presses book, if you would. So many of you will know John from his first book, The Golden Spruce. Can't get it? Oh, hello, there it is. Governor General Award-winning book for general nonfiction. Followed up by another blockbuster book called The Tiger. And then am I right? Your only book of fiction,
Yeah.
The Jaguar's Children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now finally, Fireweather. And this book, which to me it feels like both a natural progression for you from your earlier work, but I also feel like it's a kind of a shift in tone. You made a leap with this one in several respects, and I'm going to have you talk about that. But first of all, Fireweather. Tell me about what the title means and the subhead of the beast.
Yeah, sure.
What is this beast of which you speak?
Okay, I'd just like to first say thank you for a really lovely welcome. Really glad to be here. So thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Jen and Bruce have been telling me about this beautiful place for years. And I feel rather sheepish that this is my first visit, really, after 15 years or so of hearing about it. And Bruce is really one of my very first friends here in Vancouver, and certainly first writer friends. And we met over a mutual antipathy to leaf blowers, and that is really what brought us together. And I'm not kidding. I don't know if I'd know you otherwise. I'd know your byline probably, but leaf blowers, that mutual hostility really is bonding, as you probably know. Anyway, here we are finally, kind of feels like closing a circle that's been open for a while.
And you're a man from the Boston area. You grew up in Boston, the cradle of UU in North America.
Yeah, the last time I was in a Unitarian church was in 1971, and the minister had bell bottoms and a belt this fat with a huge peace symbol and hair down to his shoulders and a turtleneck sweater, skin tight, and that's the last time I was here. And you all have changed a lot.
Maybe some not so much.
I kind of miss those days. I was, anyway, very glad to be here.
Right.
But as for Fireweather, Fireweather is a technical term used by the Forest Service to basically assess the flammability of the forest. And the Fireweather Index is used by the Canadian Forest Service to basically determine and measure and quantify the fire risk for a given day. And so it's an aggregate of different numbers based on relative humidity, based on air temperature, based on fuel, moisture codes in deep soil, surface soil, blah, 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 and they put it all together and you get the Fireweather Index. And that's a number that carries a lot more weight than its low measure might indicate. So 43, for example, is a terrifying number, and yet so benign.
Is the first time you ever heard that term when you were looking into the Fort McMurray fire?
Yeah. No, as I was looking into how it behaved and what set it off, what made it different from other fires, the Fireweather Index came up. And that immediately struck me as the title because it was such a beautiful pairing of words. And it also really speaks to this century that we're in now. And I feel like we've entered a century of fire. 21st century fire is a term that I coined, for the book, because fire started to get weird around 2000, and that's something I sort of chronicle and document.
When, so the Fort McMurray fire was in 2018? 2016. 2016.
Yeah.
Where were you when that happened, and how did, tell me how you decided at some point, this is the beginning of my next book?
Well, I was in Italy and working on a novel that never got written, and but I made the mistake of being on Twitter at the time, and this horrific fire started spooling through, and Fort McMurray was known to everybody, of course, and to watch that entire city disappear beneath this really menacing-looking cloud that was eventually 14 or 15 kilometers tall, making its own lightning, making its own hail. I mean, it's really like something out of the Bible. And there were days, I don't know if you remember, those early days in May 2016 when people really didn't know what was going on underneath that cloud. There'd obviously been this huge exodus. Nobody was clear who might have been left behind or what was happening to the city. You simply could not see it. So there's 25,000 buildings, from high-rises to trailer homes, and nobody knew. And so that was really horrifying, and I was afraid for those people. And I also knew, I'm thinking, I'm a journalist, and I think, okay, journalists are going to be all over this story, as they should be. And as I watched over subsequent weeks, they were. And then at the same time, I thought, wow, this is, the biggest story in Western Canada in a generation. This has huge implications for the future, I think. And then a combination of kind of understanding that the lakes were still frozen over in Alberta at that time. There were still blocks of ice bigger than Bruce and me sitting by the Athabasca River, and it was 33 degrees Celsius and 12% humidity, which is Death Valley humidity. And the forest exploded, not like a fire, but like a bomb. And I thought, wow, if that can happen there, imagine what might happen in a more southerly, warmer part of Canada, a place filled, like where I live, with 100-year-old houses, and every house is a pile of kindling. And that was alarming to me, and so I got more curious. And then I didn't want to write a disaster book. There's a lot of those out there, and I just don't really see the utility in those. There's something almost sort of pornographic about that. And so but I didn't quite know how to move it to another level. And this I recognize as a spiritual place, and I get a lot of information and guidance, frankly, from visions and dreams. And so I took a nap and had a dream. And in the dream, I conceptualized the different themes of fire weather as mountain climbers climbing independently up the opposite faces of a mountain, all converging at the summit at the same time, unknown to each other. And I sat up out of the nap and I thought, oh wow, okay, those are the themes of the book. And then I started working on the proposal.
Wow, and you're still in Italy at this point.
Yeah, still in Italy. Yeah, so I bailed on the novel completely,
right,
and thought, okay, this is what's happening now.
Yeah. And you thought, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Fort McMurray, Alberta.
Yeah, a place I'd never been, that I have obviously, no affinity for and no understanding of, really. And it's defeated a lot of writers. There are a bunch of writers I know have gone up there and sort of been chewed up and spat out by it, just not been able to render it in the complexity and nuance, partly because it's sort of so banal on the surface, and yet there's such intensity underneath. And accessing that, is really challenging.
As I was reading it, your descriptions of Fort McMurray, I thought, John is never going to be pestered by the Fort McMurray Tourism Bureau. Do you think that, I mean, there's what do they call it, Fort Crack? And
a lot of different nicknames. Fort McMoney.
Fort McMoney. Yeah. I'm going to ask you to read a section of this. It'll get round to Fort McMurray's place as a character in this story toward the end of this section. Can I?
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah. if you don't mind. Just you'll get a sense of how this book is written, the cadences. I won't say anymore.
This is from page 60. Thank you for marking this all out.
Yeah.
So it's fire's nature. That's where we're going. It's fire's nature to strive upward. In other words, to aspire, which means literally to breathe desire into, and also to rise. Fire, it can be said, is aspiration in its purest form, desire burning and burning desire, to exist, to consume, to grow, to flourish, all as fervently as we do. Fire does not have consciousness, but it does have character, and there are internal and external factors that motivate, guide, deter, and defeat it. One of those factors is us. There is no other natural force or element over which we have such a compelling illusion of control. Fire is the only natural disaster that can be initiated by a gesture as casual as dropping a match. And this complicates our relationship to it in some profound ways. Since the dawn of the Petrocene age, 1870 to now, just a century and a half ago, we have given fire exponentially more opportunities to engage in all those behaviors we seem to emulate and excel at. But like Ariel to our Prospero, fire is a begrudging servant, selfish and willful. It yearns, above all, for freedom, which it will take at any opportunity and at any cost. And it has enabled the same impulses in us. Never in Earth's history or in ours have so many fires been ignited in so many places on such a continuous basis. At the most basic level, consider every candle, lantern, and cook fire across the globe. Approximately 3 billion people around the world still cook and or heat their homes with open fires. Then consider every gas stove, furnace, and water heater, every coal-fired and biomass-burning power station, every generator, every human-caused brush and field and forest fire. Already, we're into many billions of fires per day worldwide. And that's not even counting matches, lighters, or pilot lights, or more rarefied sources like oil refineries, incinerators, and war. Nor does this tally take into account automobiles. A single 4-cylinder car engine running at an average of 2,400 RPM, driving to work speed, will generate around 10,000 combustions per minute, more than 500,000 per hour. There are well over 1 billion cars on the road today, along with 250 million trucks, buses, and vans, 200 million motorcycles. Add to this a conservative estimate of 25,000 passenger and cargo jets, more than 50,000 cargo ships, and the unknown but certainly huge number of construction and earth-moving machines, tractors, lawnmowers, motorboats, private planes, helicopters, and weapons. If you ran all of these engines for just 1 minute, the number of combustions occurring inside them would number in the tens of trillions. Each one an individual fire generating heat, energy, and exhaust. Were you to run the world's engines for just 1 day, the number of individual combustions would elicit an error message from your calculator. Were you to transpose this impossible number to stars, these man-made bursts of heat and light would comprise hundreds, perhaps thousands of galaxies every day. In just the past 100 years, a blink in geologic time, our planet has become a flickering universe of fires, large and small. Imagine being able to see them all. Were these fires and their makers and tenders observed by visitors from another planet, humans could easily be mistaken for a global fire cult, the dutiful keepers of 1 trillion flames. Were those extraterrestrial visitors to observe us over time, they would marvel at our pyrolatric devotion, how with every additional building, house, and vehicle, we add thousands of new fire shrines and temples every day. And if, through the flicker and glare of these innumerable flames, they could see Fort McMurray with its 60-story flare stacks flying 100-foot banners of burning gas, they might conclude that as remote as they are, these night-blinding beacons must indicate one of the fire cult's most sacred sites.
Thank you for reading that. One of the things I like about your mind is that you go from, you shift perspectives from from super far out to super tiny granular detail, and the combination of those things leaves us kind of unsettled and kind of pumping for meaning in a really interesting way. I was thinking your style of narrative nonfiction writing is different from most, where it's you have a sort of linear narrative, A to B. You take a journey on one of your books, and you're often pulling off under a siding to explore something in some curious thing that really isn't necessary for the main story, but it's so interesting. I thought you make it really hard on editors because they want to cut that stuff to keep things forward propulsion, but it's so interesting that they can't, sentence by sentence, they can't cut it. I love it. So I made a little file while I was reading this. I made stuff I learned.
You see why I like them.
Well, this one totally gobsmacked me. I had not heard of this plan in the late 1950s called Project Oil Sand. Yeah. Has anyone heard of this? Okay.
Some clever folks at Atlantic Richfield, which is a California oil company, in conjunction with Edward Teller, Mr. Hydrogen Bomb, Dr. Strangelove, had this great scheme to deploy a 9-kiloton nuclear device in the tar sands underneath Fort McMurray. And this blast, buried deep in the ground, would liquefy vast quantities of this bitumen instantaneously, thereby, doubling the continent's petroleum supply in the blink of an eye. And this really, the premier, Ernest Manning, was all for it. And a bunch of other potent folks were all for it. And doctors and medical folks were really concerned because strontium-90, which is one of the things that comes out of these 1950-style nuclear weapons, is what's called a known bone seeker. So it's super carcinogenic. And eventually the plan faltered and collapsed, and I heard various theories about why that was, including concerns about Russian espionage and drawing undue attention to this petroleum supply. But in any case, luckily for us, it didn't happen. But they deployed basically the equivalent of 9 kilotons worth of natural gas in the meantime to melt the bitumen anyway. I mean, the energy expenditure up there is beyond imagining. The squandering of perfectly good fossil fuels to chase a really lousy fossil fuel is completely mind-boggling.
Ernest Manning is another thing I learned. I don't think I appreciated the degree to which the evangelical Christian community was so tight with the fossil fuel industry for so long.
Yeah.
This was this surprising to you?
I'd heard about it. I knew Stephen Harper, knew George Bush, and then J. Howard Pugh, the founder of Sunoco. He came from a pioneering oil family in Pennsylvania, very, very religious. He founded Christianity Today. He bankrolled Billy Graham. And these guys are all on a mission from God. And, they took Genesis really literally. The earth was here for our use. And how they were going to use it was by exploiting the living daylights out of it. And that was a holy thing to do, and they devoted themselves to it with incredible effectiveness and deep faith, because the oil sands, tar sands, bitumen is a long game, and it took really strong faith to pursue it, because it was so daunting. Such a daunting environment to work in, and such a daunting substance to work with, because it's really sand soaked in tar. That's what it is. It's not oil. It's not even bitumen, it is sand, all clotted with tar. And so colossal amounts of natural gas are required, roughly a third of Canada's annual production in 2017, to melt that out. And then all you got at the end of that is something you can seal your driveway with. You cannot run an engine with it, you cannot. So it has to be heated again to pull out all these impurities that are in there, and then it can go down to the Koch brothers on the US border and go into one of their specially reconfigured refineries and eventually be turned into something that vaguely resembles the beautiful sweet oil that comes out of
Sweet crude.
sweet crude that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, or comes out of Texas, or comes out of the Saudi desert.
Wow.
It's really, really mind-blowing.
Not efficient. The word exploit came up a couple of times, and I feel like that word is baked into this book, even though you don't use the word, but it's in there. And I want to show an image, Rebecca. This next one, another one that totally blew me away. So what's going on here, John? Scow tracking.
Oh, this is a really different one.
Is it not?
Yeah, it's
Isn't
hard
that,
to
you
see.
can see it.
but,
Yeah, it didn't the resolution's
Yeah,
not
no,
that great.
this is actually a different image, and so I'm not sure how useful it is. But on the left here, so I've literally never seen this image before.
Oh, okay.
But it's so in the book is another one that's a bit clearer. So these men are, I believe, towing these scows upstream up the Athabasca River. And basically, these are human beings. Would be Métis or Dene rivermen who are put into harness, a lot like sled dogs, and then tied together with 500 feet of manila line, and they march upstream towing these really heavy barges. And they would go for hundreds of miles up to the nearest railhead. And there's another image in the book. The book has a photo insert and then photos scattered throughout, and where you can really see these guys totally doubled over, just sort of grabbing onto rocks, trying to pull this scow upward. And they would come to rapids. You have to take everything off the scow. You have to portage it around the rapids. You have to pull the scow over the rapids, and you load the scow back up. You put yourself back in harness, and up you go. And everybody worked like animals up there, and that's how the bitumen deposits were first kind of examined and unpacked and explored.
Would they have been paid, the rivermen?
Yeah. So you get about $45 for 3 weeks work. This is in 1913 or so, and I have a couple of little segments from Sidney Ells. Sidney Ells was kind of the ramrod behind this whole project, and he worked for the Dominion of Mines, and he was a very tough customer himself, and he went up there and was blasting and digging and getting this tar-clotted sand, loading it onto the scows. And so he was paying each of these guys $45, but a lot of them they would get hernias, they would, it's freezing cold, blah, blah, blah. So they would take ill, they would then have to go into the scow. A bunch of them just bailed out into the forest. Eventually they would come back because they wouldn't get paid unless they came back. So you kind of get the rudiments of wage slavery in a really raw form here that really hasn't changed. And now you can get on the hook for a $75,000 600 horsepower pickup truck, for one payment slip. And then they've got you for the next 84 months, So, it doesn't matter that it's an equal opportunity machine. It doesn't care if you're Métis or a Newfie, or a Newfoundlander, but it's they'll take all comers.
That's something we never learned about in history. It's escaped a lot of us. It was a staggering portion of the book and there's a lot of moments like that in the book. So I was reading a passage to Lila aloud when you're the fire has swept through Fort McMurray and backhoes are in there, just pulling apart houses, and she said, so you've got the heavy equipment operators and the first responders and the guys going back to rescue their Harleys, and she said, there's a lot of guys. Where are the women in this story? And it just seemed to be all good old boys. And that's not quite fair, because there are women in the story. But Fort McMurray is it's a testosterone-fueled place, I would say, itself. And I feel like there's kind of an unspoken theme in this book and in a lot of your books. You correct me if I'm wrong. I'm taking a flyer here a bit. But maybe the theme is maybe we wouldn't be in this mess if the good old boys didn't have the car keys all the time. Like, the common theme is men and the damage they do.
Yeah, I guess I really hadn't thought of it that way, but you know, Moby Dick was sort of a seminal book for me, and you know, that adjective is chosen intentionally, and that you know, super just masses of testosterone and going out there doing battle and bloodshed and mayhem, and I was 14 or so wading through that, and it really impacted me. And just, you know, it's worth noting that in Fort McMurray, especially up at site, you know, up at the mines, the gender ratio is 25-1, you know, so it's all men, you know, and there's, you know, a few women, you know, working here and there, but generally it's a really male environment. So if you are going to describe a scenario, it's generally full of men. And especially as the city burned, the people who stayed behind to fight the fire totally heroically against all odds were, I don't know if any women stayed behind, actually. Everyone I interviewed, you know, was a man, and no one said, you know, I went up a number of times and talked to quite a few people, but did not find any women that I recall who stayed behind. But it's, you know, there was 90,000 people evacuated. It was the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire on Earth in modern times.
Let's flip forward one image here, Rebecca. Is this Paul's? Okay, so this is that fella Paul, his dash cam photo as he's fleeing town.
So it's even hard to tell what's going on here. This is Beacon Hill, a really beautiful tree-lined neighborhood on the west side of Fort McMurray. This glow, you see it below, that's Paul Ayers, that's the hood of his truck reflecting the fire. He's taking the picture from behind the steering wheel. His wife and daughter are in cars in front there. This combustion, this total combustion, these are called dragons, okay? And what happens when these trees get hot enough, especially black spruce, they off-gas, they vaporize, and that's what fire likes to eat. The same way we chew up our food and digest it with enzymes, what the heat is for is to make the things that the fire wants to eat off-gas. And when it off-gases vapor, you know, whether it's synthetic upholstery or the rubber in my shoes or whatever it is, once it vaporizes, then the fire can interact with it and combust. It cannot combust, you know, a piece of wood. It needs to get the wood to vaporize and release the hydrocarbons in a vapor form. And so what you're seeing here is this mass release of hydrocarbons, mass release of vapor. And so the tree then becomes, instead of a 50-foot, 60-foot tree, becomes a 150-foot tower of fiery gas. And that's what's happening. You know, these are people raise their children here, or raise themselves here. These trees were these friendly landmarks that told them they were home. And, you know, an hour earlier, that was still true. And now, he's the last one out. And a deer comes barreling out of that fire, on fire, smashes into his truck, goes staggering off. I said, well, so what was the temperature in your truck? Did you think to look at that? And he said, yeah, it was 66 Celsius in my truck. And so why those cars didn't explode, I don't know, you know. Why nobody was killed in the flames of Fort McMurray, I don't know. But Canada got a pass. Canada got a pass. And this would be a Titanic story if people had died, but people didn't die. And so now it's something else. But what it is was a freebie. As devastating as it was, as traumatizing as it was, people escaped with their lives against all odds. And Canada's a lucky country in many ways. And one of my goals with this book is to say, folks, we got a freebie, but we're being told something here that we really need to pay attention to. And, Alberta and northern BC and Saskatchewan are being reminded of this as we speak. The place is in flames again. But
So this guy made it out? Everyone made it out?
They all made it out. But I was just talking to Paul, and he said, I think we're going to sell our house. And I said, why? And he said, because, these fires that have just come through again, my wife is now so afraid, Michelle is now so afraid, and honestly, I am too. I don't feel safe anymore. These are Albertans whose whole fortune and identity is built in Fort McMurray. And now they are so traumatized. They don't feel safe. And to me, the analogy is, think about kids in certain high schools down in the States. Like, once you've had gun violence in your school, you can never go through those doors again. And this is the same. Once that sort of sacred trust of the inviolability of your home has been violated by fire, you can never be sure the next time you go home, wherever that home is it going to be there? And so, especially as flammable as that place is now, as Canada is becoming now, this question is becoming really alive for people. And if you have PTSD, as a lot of people do in Fort McMurray, then it's just much more present all the time and kind of comes popping out in these alarming ways. So there's a whole sort of psychological component to this that isn't really addressed adequately, in my view.
Well, speaking of psychological components, there's a word, I give another words I learned. Infandus. Am I pronouncing it right? Infandous. Infandus?
Yeah, an infandus. Yeah, it's
okay,
archaic.
So a thing too horrible to be named or uttered. So there's a superstition around even talking about the fire. A lot of these people were saying they didn't want to talk about it. It's almost as if by talking about the fire, we are giving it oxygen. And it reminded me of this concept of hyper events. This new thing, things too big to be grasped by the human mind.
Oh wow, I'd never heard that.
It's a hype. So this is a hyper, and
the
global emergency is a hyper event.
Yeah.
And you said there's never been a full city that had to be evacuated before.
Due to fire.
Because it's never happened, we almost can't imagine it. It's this thing. And I was going to say, because we can't imagine it, we don't imagine it. We're like these guys. Have you seen? You haven't seen this picture. So these guys are just trying to finish their round.
Oh yeah. That's
it's like
a classic. Jesus. Yeah.
They're not to be deterred.
Just one more hole.
Totally in denial.
Yeah.
So about 3/4 of the way through your book, my reaction was, "We're done. We're screwed." What the heck were we doing, dragging our feet for 40 years when we kind of knew, or the oil companies knew? And yet it doesn't matter. We're done. It's over. But then how depressing is that? But I was pleased to see, and we'll kind of bring it home with this, that there's a little ray of hope at the end. You inject a kind of a tone that I would say is almost spiritual. I was going to have you read it, but I won't do that. I'll just have you talk about a character you now bring in, an unlikely character, Hildegard de Bingham.
Yeah.
Hildegard de Bingham. Who is she, and why do you think she belonged at the end of the book?
Well, there's a word which is reverescence, which I think is one that might resonate with this community. And reverescence is just the regrowing, the regreening. And you really see that after a fire. And so after Fort McMurray burned, these neighborhoods were complete, there was nothing left but scrap metal, and even that was altered. And yet, the city was closed. Only other city in North America that's been shut down as long as Fort McMurray was New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So people had been away for a month, 6 weeks. They came back, and the grass was all neon green and knee-high, and a lot of the flowers had bloomed. House was gone. All that's left were the concrete steps, which people said sort of were stood like gravestones through the neighborhoods with these flowers growing in front of them. And so that's reverescence. And Hildegard of Bingen was a Benedictine nun from the 10th century, or 11th century, 10th century, I think, long time ago, Rhine Valley, what is now Germany, and she was an abbess. She was a scholar. She was a prolific writer. She was also an actual visionary, and Oliver Sacks has written about her and think, maybe it was migraines, but her sisters documented her visions, and they're incredible art, really, really beautiful, vivid colors, amazing, the cosmic egg, and all kinds of really interesting imagery. But there was a term that she used, a Latin term called viriditas, which is greening, and the way she used it, though, was more like greening energy. And I was thinking about the power of nature and the power of the earth, and the way that we are, I think, at our healthiest as human beings. We're drawn to that energy. People planted those flowers. They didn't plant themselves. People planted those flowers, and that is what ended up being the most durable in those communities that burned, were the flowers that people planted. And that just seemed super potent to me, and something that we really need to remember. And I think there's we get a lot of bad news, and there's a lot of focus on negativity, and yet these other small things that are happening in parallel, they're just as real. And I really have to I'm saying this to remind myself that the buttercup that I'm seeing out there right through the door is just as real as the fire burning behind the golf course there. And that's a real challenge for us as human beings to carry with us, as we go out, this is just as real. It's a both and. All these things are occurring in tandem. And for them, as the fire was burning, it was the only thing, and it was too big. But they survived, and there are these other opportunities. And I will share this with you because, again, this is a spiritual community, and I was having a lot of trouble sleeping last night, and I was awake around 2 in the morning, and this idea came to me because I was thinking about what these people went through, and then I was, in my mind, I was looking at my hands, and is it a wound or a wellspring? And I just kept saying that for some reason. Is it a wound, like a cut into me, or is it this opportunity, this opening that things can come out of? Is it a wound or a wellspring? And again, it's that both and tension. And I'm kind of freelancing here, but it's all because of this and thinking about being together with you today and all that. So I'll stop there.
I love it. You got me thinking, and we've got to wrap it up here, but there's a term I just learned that the Cretans in Crete, in Greece, the term is, I'm going to get it pronounced wrong, but asbestos yeos, and do you know what it is?
No.
Fireproof laughter.
Oh, wow.
So they say,
amazing.
We have been through so much as a people, we're being invaded, disasters, financial disasters, that all you can do is laugh.
Wow.
And you kind of, and you laugh because you've been through these things. It's almost like you talk about the two sides of the coin there. You earn the laugh from having endured that kind of thing. And there's the note of optimism that you sneak in at the end reminded me of fireproof laughter. That sometimes, is as obscene as it seems. To laugh in the face of something like that is a justifiable
That's
thing.
phenomenal. Wow.
Let's give our guest a round of applause. And we'll have them extinguish the flame later, but over to you, Allison.
Okay.
So with fireproof laughter, that's wonderful, thank you.
for that, for the many thoughts that go with this. May we use this as an opportunity to look into this next year. May we use this as an opportunity to lead us into the next year, making a difference. Thank you. For the earth forever turning. Please rise. For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and valleys, in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons' harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to Thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue green hills of earth.
So to bring this full circle, John, I'm going to have you extinguish our chalice, which is amazingly still burning. We extinguish this flame. The world calls us to live with depth, meaning, and purpose.
We go forth with courage and love.
Now, just a couple of announcements before we go here. Am I pronouncing this right, Allison? The Adiamus concert? Adiamus concert is next Saturday, June 3rd, 7 p.m. here at NSUC. All proceeds to Family Smart, which supports families experiencing mental health struggles. And as a reminder, John is now going to head down into the basement to prop himself behind the table and sign books for you if you're interested down there. And let me just say, it's been my great privilege to share this gentleman with you today and to commiserate with him and you about the state of the world and to find a sliver of hope, a little bit of fireproof laughter, and to hang on tight to that. And now, Blue Boat home.
Though below me I feel no ocean, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor nor port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my Hail the great winds. Hail the great winds urging me. Greet the infinite. The infinite sea before me. Sing the sky, my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms. Never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue.
If I didn't mess up the lyrics. Go out into the world in peace and have courage. Thank you so much for coming. And we carry on.